shall not live by bread alone, but by every word of God. And the devil, taking him up on a high mountain, showed unto him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. And the devil said unto him, All this power I will give thee, and the glory of them, for that is delivered unto me, and to whomsoever I will give it. If thou therefore wilt worship me, all shall be thine. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Get thee behind me, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. And he brought him to Jerusalem, and set him on a pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down from hence. For it is written, He shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. And Jesus answering said unto him, It is said, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And when the devil had ended all the temptation, he departed from him for a season. Now out of this story, brief 13 lines, and again, this is the genius of Milton, yes? Out of this story, Milton is going to create another epic. Now, granted, it won't be that monumental epic of Paradise Lost. It's what we will call a brief epic. But I want to point out for your notes now that it's pretty clear to many scholars of this poem that Paradise Regained is for Milton a return to Plato's dialogues. We will have two interlocutors, those two people who usually end up speaking in a Platonic dialogue. Of course, here it will be Satan and Christ. You've already, of course, had some sense of that even in our reading, right, of this passage. Okay, let's turn now final comments. How are we going to read this epic, Paradise Regained, in the lectures to come? Well, first of all, let's just remind, we're always working with 3 levels of reading, yes? We're always beginning with our definition, as we always do in 303 of learning, the capacity to connect, relate new information to old information. We're always playing that game, and we're doing it at 3 levels. Level 1, what does the text say? Where we'll summarize, for example, a book 1, for example, in the next lecture of Paradise Regained. Level 2, what does the text mean? Here, of course, we're asking 2 different types of questions at 2a. Themes and messages. I've already mentioned, for example, the notion of hunger. You heard it, obviously, in our reading from the the Luke 4 passage, yes? At 2b, rhetoric, not what Milton says, but how Milton says it. How can Milton take 13 lines and turn it into 2,000 lines of poetry? Well, we'll talk about that one, obviously, going forward, just like we did with Paradise Lost. Finally, at the 3rd level, we'll ask, how can we relate to this text? Of course, 3a, how do we relate to other texts, for example, and as well, how do we relate to the world in general, history, maybe other events, etc. And then at level 2b, how do we relate to self, right? This, of course, is the most important level for us because we're able to make connections. Of course, the focus that we're going to take with Paradise Regained is the same focus we took with Paradise Lost. I just mentioned it a few moments ago. For example, we'll study this poem as an epic poem. We'll ask, is it a mature poem? And why isn't it not as popular, right, as Paradise Lost? Why is it that people don't enjoy this one as much as Paradise Lost? We'll have to ask that one. From the philosophic theological, think about your dates. Just watch this and write these down. St. Augustine, City of God, roughly 426 Common Era. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica, roughly 1250. It's a good working date for us. Think about Luther, October 31, 1517. Of course, Hamlet, we've said already, 1600. We just read from the King James Version of the Bible, 1611. Paradise Lost, as we said, 1667, and now Paradise Regained, 1671. That span of years will offer to us the opportunity to kind of watch a certain kind of tension or dialectic. Christian theology has always been involved in this kind of dialectic or tension, and we'll see it in Paradise Regained. But we want to pay attention to what every one of those names I just mentioned, from Augustine and Aquinas to, of course, Luther. We could have mentioned Calvin, of course, right? And any number of other important theologians. All of them are interested in the study of hermeneutics. Hermeneutics. This is the study of how we read and interpret our reading. Of course, if you think about it, when we talked about Milton's Areopagitica, right, in an earlier lecture, we said that Milton was making the argument that everyone should be free to read text for himself, herself, right? One of the great debates, of course, in the history of Christian theology is the reading of the Bible. Should it be allowed for oneself? Should it not be allowed? And of course, as we've already said in earlier lectures, the King James Version of the Bible is so important, especially to Protestants, because it will allow for anyone who can read English to read the Bible for himself, herself. That, of course, is very important. And it will be important as well as we get on into our study of Paradise Regained. How do we interpret words, in other words? From the political perspective, we will study Satan and, of course, Christ, both from the psychological perspective. Satan as deceiver, always asking questions. Here we almost do think again of the Socratic technique. And of course Christ as the hero who is able to do what Eve could not do. That is to say, he's not going to be beguiled by Satan the tempter. Although those temptations are fascinating, like for example the notion of glory or fame. I'll make you famous, Satan will say to Christ. Of course, this is an interesting idea if we especially go back to Paradise Lost, where we're told constantly that the world was created for God's glory. And of course, if Christ is God or the Son of God, then Christ already has glory. It'll be an interesting study for us. From the sociological perspective, of course, the idea of the model of how we avoid temptation, and the nature of temptation, and the ways in which people can get us to do things that we normally wouldn't consider doing. We call that peer pressure. We immediately think, don't we, of the ways in which Lady Macbeth will tempt her man, of course, in Macbeth Act 1, Scene 7, when she's able to challenge his manhood. We'll study the ways in which Satan will play the same game. Finally, I want to point this out, and I don't think this is a reach. The power of Shakespeare, we've said already in earlier lectures, is prodigious for Milton. No question about it. Milton writes that great sonnet on Shakespeare. He has given Shakespeare highest praise already. I want to think about the ways in which, for Paradise Lost, I said one of the best ways I think to read Paradise Lost in relationship to Shakespeare is Hamlet. For Paradise Regained, I think it's Tempest. And what's interesting is that we believe that probably sometime around 1610, 1611, Shakespeare wrote Tempest. Of course, what is Tempest if it's not Shakespeare's, as we understand it, last play, his final attempt to say what he needs to say? And of course, the hero of the play is who? A chap named Prospero, who of course has a daughter who will say it, brave new world. This final goodbye has to be in, I believe, Milton's mind, so much so that by the 14th line of Paradise Regained, the word prosper will be used. Here in a bit, when we come to study those opening lines of Paradise Regained, I'll want to make the point that I think it's clear in Milton's mind. He knows he's coming to the end of his life. He knows that Paradise Lost is his penultimate attempt to write a great epic poem. But I think, and this is why I think we should read Paradise Regained as an important text for Milton, I think that Paradise Regained is every bit as important for Milton in regards to how he wants to end his career. Career as writer, career as son, career as Englishman, career as politician. Nothing is accidental, as we pointed out before with Milton. The fact that when death shows up for the first time in Book 2 of Paradise Lost, it is at line 666. And of course, when Adam eats from the forbidden fruit in Book 9, it is at line 999. Milton, blind for the entire composition of Paradise Lost, always knew where he was. And I think in Paradise Regained, we have the same genius at play, and I want to try and bring that, make that open and helpful to you. Final thoughts? Let's turn now to the opening lines of Book 1 of Paradise Regained. Let's take a look at this invocation, and let's watch the genius of Milton. The mistake that we don't want to make is a mistake that's been often made, unfortunately, in the study of Paradise Regained, and that's this. We don't want to see this as a lesser epic. In other words, the great epic, Paradise Lost, and then this lesser epic, Paradise Regained. I don't think so. I think that we want to hold these texts as their own texts in their own way, in their own time. And I think that there's different kinds of agendas at play. I hope that we can be just as amazed, we use that word often in our study of Paradise Lost, at Milton's challenges, and that's exactly what I think he's doing in Paradise Regained. He is giving us challenges as he ends his life. Come back in a bit and we'll begin our study of Paradise Regained. Thank you.